What's going on, guys? My name is Wade with TechDaily. So I've been using the Samsung Galaxy A03s on and off for the last couple of months now. On the spectrum of Samsung smartphones, this device is on the low end. It's not quite the cheapest device available, but it's pretty close. And for those of you who just need a phone, any phone that's familiar, easy to use, and affordable, this is probably a device you should consider. But like most budget phones, the A03s does come with some compromises. And depending on how you use your phone and what aspects and features you value, you may or may not be okay with that. In this video, I'm gonna go over everything you need to know about the Samsung Galaxy A03s, all the good and the bad, and hopefully by the end, you'll be able to decide if this is the right phone for you. Now to start off, I think the first and likely most important thing you'll be looking at with the A03s is its price. And depending on where in the world you live, this could vary a little bit, but generally speaking, you'll see this phone selling for no more than $170. Here in the US, the major carriers and prepaid networks all seem to have it, and I've seen it selling for under $100 if you're a new customer. Either way you go, that's a pretty enticing price point for a big name brand 2022 smartphone. So I can see the appeal already. And by the way, if you'd like to do some comparison shopping of your own, I'll leave some links down below in the video description to where you can buy this phone at its cheapest current price. So like I alluded to a moment ago, one of the first big features of the A03s is its big display. This is a 6.5-inch device. That's the screen size, and in the hand, you absolutely feel every bit of that size. Granted, you've got some borders and bezels to cope with too, including a noticeable bottom chin that seems to keep coming back to these budget devices. But if you like to watch movies and TV shows on the go, this is a great size device to have with you. Also, I consider the A03s to be a relatively complete phone, and what I mean by that is physically, there aren't many features or add-ons that are missing. The build and form factor is mostly plastic, but even Samsung's $1,000 flagships are shrouded in plastic nowadays. And while you don't get any form of water resistance or wireless charging, you do get a dual SIM and SD card tray, which is great. The configuration options on the A03s are either 32 or 64 gigs, so you'll definitely want to throw in an SD card anyway. There's a headphone jack down at the bottom as well. It charges via USB-C, which seems unnecessary to mention, but even last year, a couple of Samsung's budget phones were micro USB, which was weird. And that power button on the side doubles as a fingerprint sensor. Again, this is something similar budget Samsung devices lacked. The A02s didn't have a fingerprint sensor, so adding it on this new device is great. And honestly, it should just be a default thing on every smartphone still. This one is relatively fast and accurate, and really, I'm just glad to have it. By the way, there's face unlock too. It'll get you into the phone quickly as well, though on this device, the fingerprint sensor is my preference. One other thing to just quickly mention, the A03s offers a single downward firing speaker for your out loud listening experience, and while it's good enough for what it is, I think it could be better. Adding dual stereo sound, even on a budget phone like this, should be a must nowadays. And here's a sample so you can hear it for yourself. Jumping back to the display, let's dive a little deeper into the specs and viewing experience here because there's both pros and cons with this. Like I mentioned already, the A03s's massive 6.5-inch display looks great on its own, but analyzing some of the details, you can tell this is a budget screen. The display comes in at just 1600 by 720 resolution. It packs 270 pixels per inch, and it's a 60 Hz PLS LCD panel. Collectively, these specs are what you'd find on a smartphone from maybe 5 or 6 years ago, honestly, and it's not exactly the prime Samsung screen technology you might expect, especially with some $200 to $300 devices offering significantly more right now. Still, what you do get is a surprisingly bright display for what it is, and a nicely calibrated default color profile that offers, again, bolder, brighter, punchier looking colors than what you might expect. Surprisingly, even at its relatively low resolution for its size, it's also kind of hard to pick out the pixels, unless you're really looking up close. And the off-axis dimming is noticeable, sure, but not the worst I've ever seen. screen. Altogether, the big display on the A03s is a mixed bag. There's no doubt plenty of budget elements to it, but for casual movie watching, social media scrolling, or website browsing, I think most people would be okay. And like I said, there are even some elements that are better than average, but it just seems like out of everything, this is where Samsung could have offered a bit more. Inside, the A03s is no doubt powered by some budget specs, but like I explained at the start of the video, depending on what you use your phone for, this may not impact you as much. You get the familiar MediaTek Helio P35 processor, and either 2, 3, or 4 gigs of RAM. Mine here has 3 gigs, and while those components don't sound like much, I think there is enough to work with. Now, one of the reasons to lean towards this phone versus maybe a similarly priced Moto G Pure, for example, or any other random prepaid Android device, is Samsung's software experience. I think out of all the lower end, lower spec devices you could buy, at least here in the United States, getting a Samsung A series phone offers you a better optimized, more frequently updated Android experience with all the apps and features you'd want. Now, I say that, and you can see this device, for whatever reason, hasn't yet gotten the Android 12 update, which is coming eventually according to Samsung. But even as it is, this phone for me has offered a decent user experience. There are some limits with a device like this though. Day-to-day, app-to-app, task-to-task, you'll experience a blip, some lag, an extra second or two of wait time. If you're used to less powerful, less expensive devices, it's not really a big deal, and it shouldn't come as a surprise. And if phone calls, text messages, YouTube, Instagram, web browsing, the usual stuff like that is all you really do, then I don't really think it's going to be an issue. This phone is more than just a bare bones budget core device though. You can certainly push it a bit, but I'll say that when you do push it all the way, like with games for example, that's where it reaches its limit. Now actually, you could play your favorite titles on this phone. If you don't mind waiting a minute and a half or more sometimes to launch the app, once you're inside, you'll get a smooth gaming experience, which is great, but I don't know that I'd buy this phone if graphics heavy apps were a big part of your day. Jumping up 1 or 2 notches in the A series lineup will actually get you a significantly better device than this that's specifically better for gaming. All in all, I think you just have to sort of analyze your day-to-day workflow and the apps you utilize most in deciding if this device is right for you. To stay connected to the world and communicate, to browse the web, use Google Maps, enjoy some videos or movies, this is a perfectly fine phone for all of that stuff. But for folks who need their games, who need to play them often and without hassle, you'll want to look at something more powerful. Now actually, one aspect of the A03s that benefits from less powerful specs and more casual usage is the battery life. Inside, this big phone has a massive 5,000 milliamp battery, and because you don't have crazy powerful top-of-the-line specs, and presumably since you aren't going to be pushing this phone particularly hard, you can easily get 2 full days of use out of this device on a single charge. And in fact, the A03s is one of the longer lasting phones that I've tested. 18 to 20 hours of screen on time for me at least. That's great. Less time on the charger is always a plus, but I will say for this phone in particular, it is a good thing because being on the charger is a bit of a chore. This phone supports just 15 watt wired charging. That speed, juicing up this large of a battery, means you're connected to the wall for hours on end. 30 minutes plugged in gets you less than 20% life, and 0 to 100 is a 3.5 hour endeavor. No wireless charging either, like I mentioned, but I suppose if you're only plugging in every other day, it's not really the worst thing in the world. So finally, let's talk cameras, and to be totally honest, out of everything on this phone, this is probably what disappointed me the most. Hardware-wise, the triple lens setup around back consists of a 13 megapixel main shooter, a 2 megapixel macro for up-close pics, which time and time again I consider to be generally not very useful, and a 2 megapixel depth sensor, which helps with portrait pics. The selfie camera is just a 5 megapixel lens, and altogether, while specs aren't necessarily everything, you can still sort of tell that there's not a whole lot to work with. Inside the camera app, you also notice a lot missing. No night mode is a big one. No slow-mo options for video. Not having a wide-angle lens either is also a big miss. I think over the last 1 to 2 years, smartphone cameras have evolved more quickly than maybe any other aspect of a device. And pitting this setup against anything else is no comparison nowadays. There's just a lot that's missing. In practice, the basic point and shoot setup can take a decent shot. In good lighting or outside, I don't have too many complaints, but my biggest tip actually is disabling the auto HDR option on this phone. For whatever reason, the HDR feature produces overbrightened, overexposed, poorly finalized shots in dim and low light, and it's just not something you should use. In the end, like I said, this is a camera setup that will certainly snap a pic or capture some videos, but it's absolutely the feature set that lags furthest behind anything out nowadays, even on other budget and sub $200 devices. All in all, I think you can see that the Samsung Galaxy A03s is kind of a mixed bag. Some elements of this phone, like its bigger than average screen size and surprisingly decent viewing experience, paired with a massive, long-lasting battery, give you plenty to get excited about. Other things though, like the camera in particular, and perhaps the more limited specs based on your phone usage, could entice you to get something else. I will say that even if you almost never use your phone, I don't think you should get anything lower than this device. The A02 core or A03 core, for example, are definitely not worth it. This A03s is probably the lowest of the low end you should get from Samsung, and honestly, for the price, well under $200, there's still plenty to work with. But what do you guys think about the Samsung Galaxy A03s? Let me know in the comments down below. I'd love to know your thoughts, of course. Hopefully you guys did enjoy this video though. Be sure to follow TechDaily on Twitter and subscribe to the TechDaily YouTube channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys later.